Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, a new economic deal struck and signed by Emirati and Israeli officials during Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid's landmark trip to the UAE, and of course, ribbons cut at the Abu Dhabi Israeli embassy. Meanwhile, Israel's still in the green, but racing to prevent a potentially disastrous fourth wave of coronavirus. And finally, more news from Surfside and Israeli responders on the scene talking about their delicate search and rescue methods as they work against time in Florida. Our top news tonight, Foreign Minister Yair Lapid celebrating regional peace on Tuesday at the official inauguration of Israel's first ever embassy to the United Arab Emirates. And Lapid explaining in his speech at the ribbon cutting in Abu Dhabi that peace isn't a compromise, but a victory for all that's good.
Israel wants peace with its neighbors, with all its neighbors. We aren't going anywhere. The Middle East is our home, and we are here to stay. So we call on all the countries of the region to recognize that and to come to talk to us.
The Israeli foreign minister / alternate prime minister then also thanking former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for being the architect behind the Abraham Accords that made this momentous occasion possible. Meanwhile, among the achievements just signed during Lapid's 48-hour visit, a historic economic pact, the framework of which reportedly including agreements to both strengthen previous economic deals and to facilitate the formation of new ones. All that's left is for both governments to then ratify the agreements, which, if ratified, will hold for 5-year periods. Now, certain key details from the recently signed agreements between Israel and the UAE are still vague. CEO of the International Legal Forum and Sharaka NGO board member Arsen Ostrovsky joining us with more. Arsen, thank you so much for being with us again.
Thank you.
All right, so first of all, what do we know for certain about these economic deals, what they include, what they exclude, and who will benefit most from them?
Well, to answer the second part of your question, who will benefit most, I think that's the people of Israel and the UAE, the clear winners of this. Normally with a peace deal such as this, we see advancement in incremental stages, but really after the signing of the accords, the advancement between Israel and the Gulf states, including the UAE, has really been at turbo pace. And we've seen agreements, including on this most recent visit and the first visit by Foreign Minister Lapid across a whole range of fields, from investment, from trade, from tourism and travel, to COVID research, to cultural ties and academics. So it's really been, quite frankly, across the board, and I think this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Wow, so we're likely to see a lot more of these deals, I hope, and I think Lapid mentioned that more on the way.
Yeah.
But he also indicated that the new Democratic administration in the United States is backing these deals, but not at the expense of the Palestinians. That's apparently the voice from the Biden administration. What do you think Lapid means by this? What parts of these agreements have so far been interpreted as possibly at the Palestinians' expense?
I think the Foreign Minister Lapid made it very clear in that the countries from the Gulf, including the UAE, can and should play a very constructive role in the peace process between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but that the Palestinians must first want to help and first want to advance the peace process themselves in order for other countries, including the UAE, to have a meaningful say, which they very much want to and can, but it really ultimately depends on the Palestinians and the Palestinian leadership as to whether they want to see peace advanced.
But so again, going back to Israel and maybe leaving the Palestinian Authority so-called as a third party to this, what deals between Israel and the UAE could be interpreted as being struck at the Palestinians' expense? Or is it really the deal in and of itself?
Look, in truth, none of these deals between Israel and the UAE are at the Palestinians' expense. And ultimately, I think to have a stronger region, a more prosperous region, is in the Palestinians' interest as well. And for them to want to be at the table and to have such deals as well themselves. So I don't think any of these deals are at the detriment of the Palestinian people. Ultimately, they're first and foremost bilateral deals between us and the UAE people, but hopefully the Palestinians, should they want to see advancement in these areas, will come to the table and negotiate a true and sincere peace with the Israelis as well.
All right, so now I know you mentioned that there will be likely many more negotiations on more deals, more memorandum of understanding, et cetera. Are there any clues so far as to what some of those deals might entail?
I mean, look, I think it's really an open slate. I think the bilateral trade between Israel and the UAE, as it stands at the moment, is roughly about 700 million US, but that's nothing. That's the tip of the iceberg as to what is actually possible. And remember, in the last year, we've also been somewhat constrained by COVID restrictions, and nonetheless, we have seen these incredible deals really advancing at this enormous pace, and with the countries hopefully opening up even further with the bilateral trade and tourism and travel and delegations. I'm certain that we'll only see this go one way, and that's up.
All right, well, we know that this inauguration of all these embassies and this visit in and of itself were also after having been postponed several times. So like you said, I'm sure a lot more is going to come on the way now that COVID is getting a little bit better, I should say. Arsen Ostrovsky, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
All right, speaking of diplomacy, Israeli President Reuven Rivlin is now using the stage of his farewell tour in the United States for his final efforts to facilitate peace in the Middle East. Rivlin finishing his trip at the United Nations in New York, making a plea to Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. And Rivlin's message, delivered in front of some 21 foreign UN ambassadors, is encouraging Abbas to, quote, forget about the past, unquote, and focus on coming together to build confidence and achieve peace. In fact, referring to Abbas as his cousin, Rivlin emphasizing mutual responsibilities in order to end the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, saying, we're not doomed to live together, we are destined to live together.
And I'm sure that both of us can get into the understanding how we can live together and how we should live together.
Meanwhile, Israeli President Rivlin introducing a surprise guest in his meetings with top UN officials and ambassadors, Leah Golden, mother of the late Israeli soldier Hadar Golden, who is one of 4 Israelis held captive in Gaza by Hamas terrorists for the past 6 to 7 years. Rivlin then bringing Leah Golden in hopes of pressuring the international body into using its authority to help bring these captives home. Likewise, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett conditioning the aid meant for Gaza's post-conflict reconstruction on the return of these captives. But the United States' Biden administration opposing such conditions, holding firm that the demand could cause ceasefire negotiations to fall apart. Joining me now to discuss is expert on Middle East and U.S.-Israel ties and retired Israeli Ambassador Yoram Ettinger. Yoram, Ambassador, thank you so much for being with us. Now, starting at the United Nations, how effective do you think Leah's visit will be in changing the hearts and minds or swaying them towards actually putting the pressure where it needs to be?
Well, the best predictor for assessing the impact on the UN is the past behavior of the UN, and that past behavior does not entice one to have, I would say, any hope for improved behavior. The attitude by the UN, or to be specific, the attitude by members of the UN, and I would point the finger especially at the European members of the UN, has been abysmal. They have ignored the past performance of Hamas, deluding themselves that Hamas is driven by an urge to improve standard of living, to improve the level of education and health, which has nothing, but absolutely nothing to do with the agenda, with the vision of Hamas. Any assistance to Hamas is going to achieve exactly the same results as prior projects of assistance, by the way, to Hamas, as well as to their masters, namely the Ayatollahs of Iran. Any assistance is going to be dedicated by Hamas to bolster their terror machine, to bolster their missile power, to improve the precision of the missile, and to extract more and more Israeli blood. The same thing goes for an agreement which will involve or will not involve return of living Israelis and dead Israelis. I think it's time for the UN, it's time for the US, in fact, it's time for Israel also to realize that Hamas is not amenable to credible negotiation. Hamas was established, is operating for one specific goal, and this is the destruction of the Jewish state,
okay,
and the sooner.
Well, so I was going to ask, with everything that you're saying, especially considering, as you said, Hamas's unmovable position, essentially, back to Bennett and Biden, what do you make of their respective new stances, or so to speak, new stances? Is Bennett correct in holding firm to his negotiation conditions, or is a softer hand, as advocated by the White House, better suited, and why?
Well, the way to deal with Hamas, just like any other terror organization, is by defeating Hamas, by defeating those terror organizations, to attempt to achieve few more so-called quiet years has nothing to do with relaxation of the atmosphere. Those years of no terrorism, those years of no bombing were dedicated to expand the firepower. By the way, both Hezbollah in the north and Hamas in the south, there's one way of achieving a victory over Hamas, and this is by demolishing its firepower. And I would say especially the head of the snake, not the body of the snake. And the head of the snake are the so-called Hamas political leaders. There's something which especially the US should realize. Hamas is a proxy of Iran's Ayatollahs. Hamas is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. And both the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the largest terror Sunni organization in the entire world, both Muslim Brotherhood as well as Iran, consider the US, not Israel, as their top target. The aim of the Ayatollahs of Iran is to eject, to expel the US from the Persian Gulf, from the Middle East, and to subordinate the US to the Islamic Republic of Iran. The pretense or the illusion that they are amenable to some gestures ignores the fact that by definition, Iran as well as Hamas are not amenable to peaceful coexistence.
All right, Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
In other news, rescuers in Florida now entering day 7 of their desperate search for survivors under the wreckage of a 12-story condo near Miami. The confirmed death toll in the collapse of a condominium last Thursday now rising to 12, with 125 survivors discovered and 149 still unaccounted for. Yet despite the high number and the week that has passed, the over 200 rescue workers on site are trying to remain positive and transparent, visiting experts from Israel, for one, explaining how important it is to recruit families into the search, while also revealing search methods. And Israeli Colonel Golan Vach adding that even now there is still hope to find survivors.
You have to understand where exactly were the bedrooms. So to do that, we built 3D models in Israel, and according to the finding and to the information that the family gives us, exactly where do they sleep? In the dining room, in the bedroom. You can build the layers, and then you smash the layers according to the situation right now. So our purpose is to get the first responder understand where exactly is he digging. Okay, so this is accurate the rescue efforts. Sometimes we cry. It's natural. We are working together. We talk every night, We do summaries every night with all the people. We talk and we share, and it gives us the strength, and it's our job, finally.
Still, with every passing day, the likelihood of survival dropping dramatically. Families from around the world joining together now, holding memorials, sharing stories, and praying for a miracle. Now, back in Israel, the Jewish state thankfully still considered a green country. But coronavirus infections are back on a fairly consistent rise, so authorities are yet again increasing measures to prevent a fourth wave outbreak. Hannah Rifkin with the details.
Israeli hospitals bracing for impact, expecting a potential fourth wave of COVID-19 infections and hospitalizations. One health official even telling Israeli media on Wednesday that, quote, the medical teams are already exhausted, having not yet recovered from the previous waves, and they're worried that they may not be able to stand another hit. But the hit's likely coming. 723 students, for one, now sent home from the Einstein School in Petach Tikva after 20 kids tested positive for the virus. Parents of an infected student sent her to school despite her being mid-quarantine. And a father of one of the newly infected now threatening legal action over the apparent case of negligence. Likewise, the school's PTA head, Yifat Levy, condemning the decision as an irresponsible act. Meanwhile, efforts to combat the spread reawakening too. Teen vaccinations, for example, seeing a 500% increase over the last few days, under pressure from Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and Israeli health authorities to help contain the new Delta variant. And Bennett adding that Israel is in a race against time, with massive caches of vaccines set to expire in a month's time. Then, in attempts to prevent further COVID carriers from entering the country, Ben Gurion International Airport pioneering a segregation plan for separating travelers by the country they arrived from. The order coming from Transportation Minister Merav Michaeli, who suggests using one terminal for travelers coming from red countries and another for all the rest. Further, the ministry is also increasing shuttle operations within the airport to reduce crowding, especially amid reports of massive lines of people waiting to get mandatory PCR tests. Just over a week has now passed since the Palestinian Authority reneged on a previously agreed-upon trade with Israel for over 1 million COVID vaccines. And now, without another buyer in line, it looks like soon the perfectly viable doses may all have to be tossed in the trash. Israel could flush roughly $32.9 million down the drain if the country doesn't find buyers in the next 2 weeks for vaccines that are soon to expire. The country currently has a surplus of 1.4 million shots of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine that will expire at the end of July, 90,000 of which were sent back by the Palestinian Authority on June 18, when a trade deal collapsed under the pretenses of a coming expiration. In any case, while the Israeli Health Ministry hopes to use 600,000 vaccines on its own population, half of which will likely target teens aged 12 to 15, at least 800,000 doses will need to be sold or thrown out. The good news is that the Jewish state's hunt for buyers is coinciding with other countries expanding their own vaccination drives. This in efforts to deal with the increase in cases of the rapidly spreading Delta variant from India. Reports have not yet named the countries Israel is in talks with, however, but the hope is to either have the vaccines purchased or taken in exchange for future vaccine shipments, like in the original deal with the Palestinian Authority. Moving on, a recurring bill yet to pass, this time resurfacing thanks to Finance Minister Avigdor Lieberman. The cancellation of the exemptions on VAT, or value-added tax, for online overseas purchases of up to $75. And this in an attempt to encourage consumers to prioritize Israeli companies over those based abroad. Here in the studio with some insights on what that means for you, Assistant Professor and Economic Consumer Behavior Expert, Billy Abraham. Billy, it's always a pleasure to have you back. Thank you.
Always a pleasure to be here.
All right, so first of all, just put this into context for our viewers. What do we currently pay on VAT, import taxes, and sales taxes?
All right, so if you order anything that costs up to $75 on the internet, you're exempt from all taxes, okay? If it costs somewhere between $75 and $500, you pay VAT, and in certain cases, you also pay purchase tax. If it's between $500 and $1,000, then you pay VAT, purchase tax, sales tax. And if it's valued over $1,000, you're considered an importer, so you're paying everything, all these taxes, including insurance and lots of other stuff.
So, okay, so why does the government want to cancel the VAT exemption for purchases arguably so little, I mean, under $75? And what or would consumers rather and local businesses theoretically benefit from this?
All in all, Israelis spend about 16 billion shekels annually buying things online. 65% of that is from purchases made abroad, Amazon, etc. And the government is losing somewhere between 1.5 billion and 2 billion shekels every year in taxes. And that's a lot now because the budget deficit is 150 billion shekels, and they need to find a way to fill in the government coffers. As far as consumers, it is going to be more expensive, 17% more expensive, but I don't visualize people running to Israeli stores and buying, because usually the price difference between the products you buy here in Israel and the ones that you can buy online is huge. It's tens of percentage points and sometimes hundreds of percentage points. So I don't think that's going to make a big difference unless you are what is called an ethnocentric consumer, meaning you buy or prefer to buy made in Israel products and you're willing to pay more.
So you're saying basically, again, the theory behind this practice is that we'll drive Israelis to purchase from Israeli companies because we'll add this tax and we'll cancel the exemption. But you're saying that if we leave the theory behind, the truth is that that's really just not going to occur.
No, because Israelis want variety, and they can find stuff on the internet that they cannot find in Israeli stores. And again, the big price difference. And I think if you look at businesses, I think a better way to cope, look, businesses are really angry about this. They think that they're losing a lot of money. And I think that a better strategy for businesses would be to decrease prices, lower their profit margins, and sell in larger,
more competitive.
Exactly, in bigger amounts. And this is how you can make more money. But if you have something in the States that costs $1 and you sell it here for $10 or $20, people are not going to buy it. But if you sell it for $2, a lot of people are going to buy it. And maybe if it's just even 10% more expensive than what you would buy online, but you can get it here more quickly or immediately, then it could be a bargain. Exactly. So we have to change the strategy. Unfortunately, I don't see Israelis flocking to stores now in Israel and buying a lot more because of the major price differences.
Wow. All right. Well, so at least you gave us a couple of tips to maybe become a little bit more competitive in the international market. Billy Abraham, as always, thank you so much.
It was a pleasure.
Now, our final topic tonight, a new exciting partnership with Izzy, the Israeli streaming platform through which consumers can enjoy a different way to watch ILTV. For example, with Izzy, people will be able to catch up on the latest Israeli news, as well as with special ILTV Izzy collaborations. Here to tell us more is Josh Hoffman, co-CEO and founder of Izzy Streaming. Josh, thanks so much for being here. All right, tell us a little bit about Izzy. How would you describe it, and what are the need-to-know basics?
Definitely. I mean, I say that Izzy is, the next best thing to being in Israel, right? Israeli movies, TV shows, documentaries, now news with ILTV, which is amazing. And it's really allows people to experience Israel from anywhere in the world on demand. Just like you get Netflix or HBO, you get Izzy on those same platforms.
So where is Izzy available, though? Because if I understand correctly, it's not actually for Israelis.
Correct. We're only interested in exporting Israel and the magic of Israel to the world. So Israel, ironically, is the only country that you can't get Izzy. But if you're not in Israel, any other country in the world, you can get Izzy on any of the platforms that you get any other streaming platform.
Any plans to maybe expand to Israeli audiences back locally in the future?
Anything can happen, never say never, but at the same time, we have local partners like other TV channels and now ILTV, so, we're not trying to step on anyone's toes, and we definitely want to just continue to pursue our mission of enhancing the world's relationship with Israel.
All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the ILTV Izzy partnership, which I'm very excited about. What can we expect from it?
Well, the thing that really excites me is that it's a collaboration. And in what I call the world of Zionism, I think we need more collaborations, nonprofits, for-profits, media companies, and other media companies. So I think if we can create a model and an example of what a nice, legit collaboration looks like, that's the most exciting thing to me.
Josh, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Aaron.
All right, now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Hannah Rifkin.
All right, and now temperatures are still high, but staying level for the most part. Lows tonight, mostly in the 20s in Celsius. Then moving on into Thursday, highs in Israel's northern and southernmost areas, still a bit hotter than other areas, though you can expect most of the country to be in the 30s in Celsius. Now back to Aaron in the studio.
All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.25 shekels to the American dollar and 2.63 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.